Hello again, Internet. Once again, you have found your way to Clarksville Guns Archery here in Clarksville, Tennessee. As usual, I'm your friend, I would hope, David. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a history and relevance on the Glock pistols in general. We get a lot of people coming in looking at the different various polymer guns that exist nowadays, and there's a lot. And every one of them has their pros and cons. So a lot of people always ask, well, why is Glock still around? Why are they still relevant? So we're going to kind of touch on that a little bit today and hopefully give you an idea of why that's still a thing. So to kick this off, before I start talking about what I have in front of me, let's talk about Glock as a company. Back in 1980, Gaston Glock had overheard a conversation between two higher-ups in the Austrian military discussing a new pistol that was to replace the aging Walter P38. What he did, essentially, I'm going to cut as much as I can without going into lots of detail, otherwise it's going to be a long video. He bought several pistols that he could, fired them, found out what he liked and didn't like about them, got information from other people who had been shooting for a very long time, sat down and said, okay, I'm going to create a pistol that's going to get all the pros that people want with all the cons. So in 1980, he did come out with the P80, which would have become the Generation 1 Glock 17. Now in this country, they weren't very prevalent until about the late 80s. 1986 is, I believe, when they first started getting imported. So the first generations only lasted for about a year, then the second generations came in, and that's when everything kicked off. So roughly 1988 onward, Glock pistol was very much a household name. Certainly by the 90s, you started hearing about it, and definitely by the late 90s, it was the pistol in America. Why this picked up? Well, no other gun at the time was as reliable as Glock was. There would be other firearms that might have the same level of reliability later on, but during that time, that level of reliability was not there. All the stories you heard about throwing them around, throwing them off helicopters, beating them with rocks, that was all true to some degree. Of course, as all mechanical objects can fail, you can have those problems. Generally, Glocks didn't do that. If it did, it was a sample size of one. So to kind of kick this off, we want to kind of give you a background of why they're so popular, why they're still around, why that's a household name. So let's just kick off essentially with the Glock 17 pistol. I'm going to pick this bad boy up. I know people on the internet worry about this, but just so you guys know, these have all been checked. We're still going to do it anyway. It's unloaded. It's not going to be pointing at anyone. The muzzle's not going to be pointing at anyone, so please don't worry about that. Go ahead and close it up. So newer shooters, people that maybe never messed with a Glock before, and again, there's tons of information out there. The first thing a lot of people notice is there's no manual safety on this firearm, and that freaks some newer shooters out. There's no need to worry about that. One of the rules of firearm safety, other than don't point the muzzle at anything you're not willing to destroy, is keep your finger off the trigger. Well, if your finger's off the trigger, this gun will not go bang, and that's precisely because of the trigger safety mechanism. What happens is Glock has three passive safeties: the trigger safety, the firing pin safety, and the drop safety. We'll include a little bit of a diagram here to kind of show you what I'm talking about. But in essence, what's happening, getting this unloaded. If you want to stick up in here on the trigger, if you notice there's a little double trigger here. So what happens is if I pull this as hard as I can from the side, that gun is not going off, my hand shaking. I don't know if you guys can see that. But there's a little piece of plastic back here. That piece of plastic is keeping that trigger from being pulled, which essentially means I can toss this literally out of a high altitude, smack it on the ground, it will not go off until I do this. My finger goes in the trigger well, pushes that little tab, that little double trigger, so to speak. It pulls back. What's happening is when I'm pulling the trigger, I'm completing the cocking process, because right now this gun is in half cock. So I'm completing the cocking process, which is the mush you feel. Then all of a sudden, gun goes bang, round goes off, trigger resets, and we go back to square one. That is perhaps the simplest way to explain how this firearm works. Again, a lot of information, don't want to make it too long, but that's how the trigger system works. So those of you that are new to this, they're worried about it doesn't have a safety. All you have to remember, this gun will not go bang unless your finger's on the trigger. And if your finger's on the trigger, you're not ready to shoot, you are doing something you're not supposed to. Just keep that in mind. So why do I have these three out? These are the three most popular Glock pistols on the market. This Glock 17, the Glock 19, the Glock 43X. The number nomenclature does mess with people sometimes. They don't understand why the numbers seem out of order. The reason for that is each time Glock patents a firearm or an item, because they make things other than guns, they use a number system. From day one, the first 16 patents were curtain rods, knives, and entrenching tools. And his 17th patent was a pistol. Thus it started with that. Without going into a lot of detail either, the 17 is the flagship full-size firearm. The 19 is the compact pistol. And the new queen, so to speak, is the Glock 43X. There's not a whole lot that changes between these things. The biggest thing with the models is the caliber and the size of the gun. Other than that, if you know how a Glock works, they all kind of work the same. That is boring, but that's a good thing because boring means reliable. Reliable means it's going to work when I need it to. Again, I have never seen a lot of serious problems with Glock pistols. There might be one here and there, but for the most part, these things tend to work. Why we have the 19 out. Let's go to that real quick. The 19 is still to this day probably the most popular pistol that they make. What people are finding out, I'll go ahead and pick it up and show you. I have fairly large hands. Okay, I don't have super long hands, but I don't have small hands. If you can kind of see how it fills my hand up a little bit, and I wear a large size glove, I can still get a full grip on this gun. While it's a compact, yes, it's smaller, I can still get a good fighting grip on if I need to. That's why the 19 is relevant, and a lot of people all over the world that can own pistols have picked up on that. So why the 19 over the 17? Well, I can hide it if I need to, but I can also use it like a full-size firearm if I need to. The other thing that people picked up on, and I don't think Glock intentionally meant to do this, so it's kind of interesting how this happened. I take the 17-round magazine out of the pistol, and of course the Glock 19 is a 15-rounder, so I'm losing 2 rounds. This is another reason the 19 has been around for years. I now have 17 rounds that I can work in this firearm. Yes, other companies do that now. I realize it's the year 2024. Glock was the first one to really do that. So again, there's why we have staying power. Now with the 19 being popular, and it still is, why did I bring out the 43X? Out of everything I just talked about with Glock being a thing, the size of the 43X is kind of considered the perfect size, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, for most people. It's roughly the same height as a Glock 19, so if I take these two and put them together here, and again, they've been checked, I'm not putting a gun or load a gun at myself. They're the same height. Save for the fact that one is wider than the other and you have a little bit less of barrel length, you're essentially getting the same firearm. There has been some issue with people freaking out about it, only have a 10-round magazine. Here's why that's a good thing. I go to a state that has a magazine cap. Yeah, it's only 10 rounds. I can walk around that state with their restrictions. If this situation were to happen where I am not in a banned state and I want more rounds, there's several companies that make aftermarket magazines that are 100% reliable, regardless of what you're on the internet, that do work, that take the round count to 15. I've even seen some 17 rounders here and there. So you can get them in a gun that size. Again, the question comes up though, why this and not one of these other options? And of course, that's an answer you kind of have to answer yourself. I can't really answer that for you. What I will tell you is because these pistols have been around since the 1980s, it has that name recognition, people know what they are, and there's a ton of aftermarket support. I can pick about any polymer gun with the exception of 1 or 2 other companies that don't have near the amount of aftermarket support. I can always find holsters, I can always find mags. Mag prices are a thing. You want to buy a spare mag for another company, you're paying 40, 50 bucks. With Glock, you're paying between 25 to 30. That's substantial. That's the difference between a box of ammo or not. There are some things that maybe I would do differently, but I'm not Glock. I just kind of make the gun work to myself. Most shooters out there will tell you the same thing. I'm not going to go too much into this because the video is already long as it is. I could spend all day talking about it, but we just want to give you an idea of why this gun is still relevant, why it's so popular, why so many law enforcement agencies use it, because over 80% of the law enforcement in the U.S. still uses this pistol. Most militaries across the world use a Glock pistol in some capacity. If there's any question on the gun not being reliable because way back when, I don't trust a plastic gun, that ship has sailed. This is the thing. We're here now, living in this world. Polymer guns are here to stay. They have been for a very long time. It's just we're finally getting the recognition it deserves. So for those of you out there considering why Glock, hopefully this gave a little bit of idea on why you'd buy one. If you watch this whole video to its entirety, we appreciate it. We appreciate you guys watching. If you're in town, come by and see us. If you live in Clarksville, come by and see us. We'd like to talk to you guys, get some feedback. If you like this video, like and subscribe.